Now the clouds have cleared, I found a spot with a view to chat with Chris Andrews about the Black Duck food story. So can you begin by telling me a bit about Black Duck Foods?
Yeah, we're an Indigenous social enterprise. We got going sort of properly at around November 2019, so just at the tail end of the drought, just before the bushfires, and then we joined everybody in COVID. So we've had a fairly challenging sort of year and a bit as a startup organisation, but fortunately we're still around, and obviously we're proceeding and doing more and more each day.
What are you farming here?
What are we farming? Well, we're undertaking sort of a resurrection of sorts of some of the traditional agricultural practices and traditional food systems. So we're taking the stock off, and we've let the native grasses come through, and so we're harvesting those and seeing how we process that. A bit further down the hill, we'll get down to a little bit later on, there's some murnong, some other tubers. And then we're basically farming country and looking at what country yields us in terms of opportunities for food systems, and really importantly, opportunities for developing Indigenous businesses out of what we're trying to do. So there's a lot going on the farm, but there's also a lot of what we try and do outside of the farm to influence those businesses growing as well.
So the main objective is not necessarily to sort of have a high yield output?
I think the main objective is to try and rediscover what's been here for thousands and thousands of generations and adapt some of those practices that were historically done before colonisation and sort of the willful damage of country, and look at that in a context of how we then create that back into Australia's traditional food system. And in doing that, look at farming practices, technology, legislation, nutritional values, all those sorts of things. So a lot of that happens here in terms of practicing what we need to do and learning and making mistakes so we can share that. And then a lot of it is advocating for that outside of the farm and sharing what we're trying to do here with the mobs outside. Each mob are going to have their own food story. Ours is to sort of share our yarn, and I think it's really important we're not telling people how to do it. We just want to share a story. This is what we've tried, but it's going to be different on different countries. So it's really important for us is to create a safe space to invite people to hear our yarn, to share that yarn, and do it in a really respectful sort of way.
And so have you noticed any changes to the landscape since you've been working here?
No, absolutely. Yep. So Bruce bought the property a couple of years before sort of Black Duck came of age, and just taking off the stock, it allowed some of the native grasses to come back. So we're seeing a variety of different species come through and just heal, and we're seeing soil recover. We're seeing grasses and the kikuyu now compete more and more with some of the native grasses, and certainly after the fires that took out the kikuyu, we saw an abundance of some of these grasses come through. So, you know, slowly this country's healing, and with that healing, it's rediscovering its traditional food story.
Where does the name Black Duck actually come from?
Black Duck Foods, yeah, we're gifted that in terms of it's the totem for this area. And so we have an Indigenous and a Yuin majority board. Unlike other sort of standard organisations that have a board, our board's then answerable to elders of the Yuin community, and they sought their permission to use the totem as our company name. And with that permission, we operate. So we feel we've got a cultural licence to operate because of that connection and that authority, and that allows us to operate on Yuin country as a Yuin business, and then grow Yuin foods. We are a startup. That's just our technology is 65,000 years old.
And so that cultural element is really informs everything that you do?
It gives us licence to operate. So without that authority, we wouldn't have this business, and nor would we want to seek that. So it gives us the cultural licence, it gives us that connection to country, and it's a framework we get invited into. So as a non-Indigenous person, I'm invited in onto this country to operate under that framework. And it's also about telling a lot more people about understanding an Indigenous framework as opposed to non-Indigenous or a colonisation framework, because what we can't keep doing is forcing Indigenous people to work under a non-Indigenous or a colonial framework. And we've seen the result of that. And it's not something that any of us should be proud of, and it lacks a lot of our humanity that we've allowed it to go to where it is now. And it's time to sort of start saying, you know, the whitefella laws don't actually work that well for blackfellas. That we need to be more respectful of the traditional owners and the original nations people and understand how they operated on this country and move to be invited into their framework instead of forcing them into these artificial frameworks that we've created here over the last 250 years.